All right, this might be the most special Inappropriate Earl ever. It's not often I get to have sponsors on the show, and today I have the man, the myth, the legend, who, if you know who sings the opening song to Inappropriate Earl, the great ballad Forever Yours, you know who my guest is. He runs the greatest metal site in the business, metalsludge.tv. This man was there in the 80s. He lived the 80s, and he keeps the 80s going through his website and various 48 businesses he has online. Please put your dirty, greasy fingers together for the great Stevie Rachelle.
Dunka. Thank you, Earl. That was an amazing introduction. I don't know that I am deserving of all those accolades that you just poured over me in this beautiful West Hollywood resort-esque setting we are sitting in right now, but thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you, Stevie, because I have two sponsors for this show, you and the great Stephen Piercy, and I know I can say I've nailed you both. I mean, not sexually.
I love Piercy, and I will, before we go further, I'll interject right there. 1984, the Out of the Cellar tour. I saw Rat live in Wisconsin probably only a couple of mere months after I witnessed Motley Crue Shout at the Devil tour and Van Halen 1984 tour. And Piercy immediately became my top three. And he has stayed there for 30 plus years. I love Stephen Piercy. I love Rat. Those records, one right after another, just kicked my ass. I love him, and I love that sound. I love Rat.
He was incredibly nice.
Kudos to Sepp.
I mean, I heard some people say, "Hey, man, he can be kind of a weenie." You know, and I couldn't have. He's probably the nicest person, other than Fred Corey, I've had on the podcast,
or me. But
we haven't even completed it yet.
Finished me
because you run Metal Sludge. That's your baby, and I remember the first time I heard about it. And I'm not name dropping here, but
drop them because I'm going to drop them too.
It's not much of a name drop, but I was, as many know, I am good friends with Brent Fitz, the drummer from Slash's band,
right?
And he was roommates of the great Eric Mensinger from Kiss, Alice Cooper. We were at his house watching his dogs, and he's like, "Dude, you got to check out this site. It makes fun of everything you love." And I'm like, "What is it?" He's like, "It's something called Metal Sludge." They interview like Mark Ferrari and like, people like that.
Right.
And, the third bass player from Keel. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy. And I've been hooked ever since.
Right.
I mean, because now it's out in the open that you run it.
Right.
But back then, it was like a big mystery.
Right.
And you had to keep your anonymity. Right. Or you chose to. Why were you secretive?
Well, here's what happened. In the summer of 1998, God, I mean, the industry as we knew it. When I say we, I put everybody into the basket of, the hard rock bands, the hair bands, the Sunset Strip bands, the bands from the 80s, the Headbangers Ball bands. I mean, things were desperate at that point. Magazines fell by the wayside. God forbid there was no more issues of Blast or Metallics or rock hunks on the newsstands.
I assume you were the centerfold of that.
I was absolutely actually a pinup and a centerfold in a couple of those, which is kick-ass. So all that stuff had kind of just faded away. And me and a very good friend at the time, Sean Card, who had worked with us on the road and did videos with us, we just came up with this idea to put together a website. And I honestly came up with this idea based on an incident that happened with Jerry Miller, which she was the editor of Metal Edge. And that the reason I got angry with her was basically just because I heard she had kind of dissed us,
and she was very powerful, at least to metal bands, because She ran Metal Edge.
Right. And I will say this, and I've said probably some hardcore negative things about Jerry over at some points because of what happened and whatever, but I have no ill will towards her. She was an amazing supporter of Tough in the early days. She put a ton of me in the, our band in the magazine, and she was very much supportive. But the thing is, I remember as big as that magazine became, I remember that she obviously was at the helm of it. And when she would come to Los Angeles from New York, we'd see her at clubs, and she was always great to us. And I even helped, I think, push like Wild Side and maybe Tommy Gun and some other local bands.
Well, I'd keep that under wraps.
Into the magazine, and tell her, hey, you got to check these guys out. They're good. And they made it into, say, Rock on the Rise or whatever. But these guys in these bands, these grown men, 25, 28-year-old, they'd be following her around FM station or in the Whiskey and the Rainbow, like, hey, Jerry. And they'd, so badly wanting to kiss her ass because they knew if they could get in that magazine, it could make a difference, which it did. So, and I saw how she kind of picked favorites, whether it was Warren or Slaughter or Trickster or Firehouse, which also, and hey, Tough was one of her favorites. So we got a lot of adulation from her. And with that, I benefited from it. But I also, in the back of my mind, I thought, oh man, the poor guys in Paradise or whoever, were trying to get in and couldn't get her attention. And so years went by. Now it's 1996, 97. And I remember I had reached out to her to see if she would do something on my side project called the Cheeseheads with Attitude, which nobody knew about it. It was this football project. And she kind of scoffed at me and told me it was kind of silly and stupid and there's no reason to do it because it's a rock magazine. And at one point, I came back with, well, you got a fucking 9-page feature in Eric Turner's Juice Bar. Like, what the fuck does that have to do with rock and roll?
A lot.
He's running a fucking sandwich shop in Canoga Park, but you're doing a story on it. So at one point, she did turn around, and an assistant editor named Paul Gargano, who had worked there, went to college at Madison, UW, University of Wisconsin-Madison, and was a huge Packer fan, and he somehow overheard or found out about this project. So he did a little feature and convinced Jerry to put it in the magazine. So we ended up in the magazine. But that was like one of the first times that I'd come to her with something and she kind of bucked me off a little bit. I actually tried to get the Mistakes in that magazine as well. Around the same time, I had helped them produce their first record, and actually I financed it. And they were very much a Rancid kind of band, Mohawks, and that stuff was happening. And again, she kind of dissed it, like she thought it was silly. But at the same time, I remember she was very supportive of Number 9, which was one of Tommy Thayer's projects with Dave Aragon, Dave Diggity, who was on MTV Pimp My Ride. And I think Kenny Queens was in Number 9. And they were kind of a punk vibe, So again, I bolted right at her and I said, well, hey, you're doing all this stuff on Number 9. They're punk, they're very much like the Green Day, the Offsprings, the Rancid. Put my band in there. I'm trying to push them. So I don't remember if she put the Mistakes in there or not, but then I did a solo CD and I did some shows with Gilby Clarke, Kip Winger. I think Juan Crociere had a band called Blue Sunday.
Liquid Sunday.
Liquid Sunday.
I know. I'm very knowledgeable.
We're dealing with a rat expert on the other end of the studio here. So what happened then is I called her and I said, hey, I'm playing with Kip Winger at the country club. And it was very stripped down. Kip was doing acoustic. My band was kind of like a John Cougar thing. And through the grapevine, I won't name any names.
Oh, come on, man.
Through the grapevine, Jerry said, I don't know why he's inviting me to this. It's over. They need to just stop or something like that. And it was at that point, this is like July, August of 1998. I was like, oh, fucking dang. I was just ferocious. I was so mad, because I heard this direct diss and I just, it popped into my head. I'm going to start a website. I'm going to call it Metal Sludge, and I'm going to do everything in my power to destroy that magazine. Like, that was exactly what I thought in my head. Of course, after the fact, it wasn't just about like, let me destroy Jerry Miller. And again, all respect to her. If I saw her today, I'd be more than happy to smile and shake her hand and hug her if she'd let me. But I did take some shots at her. But, I think that she really used her power with that at times in the industry. And hey, I got my way with her. She put a ton of our, we had a ton of press for years. And it was at that moment that Metal Sludge was born. And so then me and Sean just kind of said like, hey, let's do this. And what can we do to create a website? We knew nothing about websites, and the websites weren't even around at the time, really.
This is in the dark ages of the early beginning ages.
Yeah, exactly. So we started coming up with ideas, and Sean said, let's do a 20 questions. And he kind of modeled that after Playboy, because Playboy has a 20 questions interview every month with Dennis O'Leary or whoever, and then I said, yeah, we could do like a top 10 list like Letterman, because I was a big Letterman fan. I was like, we could do the top 10 reasons Mark Slaughter sounds like a cat in a blender or something like that. And all respect, Mark's a friend of mine. I saw him on the cruise. I love Mark, but this is 18 years ago. That's just like some people had said, oh, he sounds like he's screaming, he's screeching, so we just came up with all these little quirky, silly ideas. And then Sean said, yeah, and let's have like a girl of the month. We'll call her a sludgette.
Right.
And a sludgeaholic, and that was kind of modeled off, ICP, which is a Detroit band, which Sean really liked and introduced me to. They used to have a thing called a Juggalo and a Juggalette, like that were fans of theirs. So, and then I was like, okay, great. And then I said, I came up with this moniker idea of how we would create our identities. And we took a first name from one rock star and a last name from another and put them together to create that identity. And, so I got that from Andy Setcher from Hit Parader magazine, which I'm going to name names.
Please do.
Way back in the day, we were signed to Atlantic Records subsidiary called Titanium. Now, Titanium was owned by 4 partners. Andy Setcher, who was the editor of Hit Parader, another rock magazine.
A big one.
Yeah. Paul O'Neill, who was a producer and had worked with Savatage. And fast forward, he's the man that invented TSO, Trans-Siberian Orchestra. He's the CEO, creator of that. Paul O'Neill was a partner. A guy named Sheldon, who was kind of like a silent partner, wasn't really a music-related guy on the West Coast here. And then Mitch, who was involved with Hit Parader. So there was 4 partners. And so they signed us to Titanium Atlantic. And Andy Setcher, at one point, when we were in New York City doing an interview, or not doing an interview, doing press and stuff, we went out to dinner one night. And so I'm sitting with Andy, and we're at a restaurant, and Andy's a big sports fan. And I remember I asked him something about something that was in the magazine, like a review or something. And I go, oh, and so, yeah, and all the writers that you have for the magazine or whatever. And he's like, what do you mean writers? I said, well, you have like a bunch of different people. And he goes, no, it's all me. I do everything. I do all the interviews. I do all the reviews. All the content is me, which was kind of the same thing with Jerry Miller. And I think at one point she brought in some assistants and they contributed. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? Like I saw an interview that was by, say, Joe Johnson or something. Right. And he goes, well, what I do is, he goes, see, Stevie, he's like, what I'll do is I'll listen to a release by, insert band name here while I'm watching the game on TV. And he was a big baseball fan. So he goes, what I'll do is I'll take the first baseman's first name and the pitcher's last name. Like say it was Pete Rose and Raleigh Fingers, it'd be Raleigh Rose or Pete Fingers. Right. So he goes, I would write a review of, an Alice Cooper CD or something and then go, I think it's going to be Raleigh Rose who wrote that.
Right.
That way he doesn't attach his name to it. So then Sean came up with Janie Bon Neal, which is Janie Lane, John Bon Jovi, and Vince Neil all combined. I came up with Tammy Sex Slaughter, which was Tammy Down, Steve Sex Summers, and Mark Slaughter. And then we had
The girl,
Donna Anderson, which was Donna D'Errico and Pam Anderson from Baywatch combined. Those two became Donna Anderson. So, and then we had Blackie's Enough and Bloss Dockin and
I think I was when I contributed a few things, Vinny St. Kulik.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then we had reached out to friends and other people that became friends of the sites, and some people started contributing, and we started using that content as well. So all these different little things, that's how we created Metal Sludge. And one of the things that I said in the beginning, and Sean agreed, was we're going to do it anonymous. And our theory was two things. We came up with let's do it like the Masked Magician, who used to do tell all the secrets of magic, but he'd wear that mask. Or the other thing was the Unknown Comic, which you obviously remember that.
The great Murray Langston.
Right. The guy that came out and did his whole skit with a paper bag on his face, And even Kiss in the early days was always in makeup. They were never seen without. So the idea was to do this Metal Sludge site anonymously. And it was a little bit more complex as time went on, as it got bigger, and I lived here. And I was not only in Los Angeles, but I also was not just in the scene, but I was in the scene 10 years previous. So that's something that I think people started narrowing it down. They're like, when we started dropping comments about Robbie Crane and Hot Wheels or Lancia or the band Creature or, just things that were related to the strip that only somebody that was here in that 2-3 year window would know that, because there was a lot of times that people went, oh, it's some 20-year-old kids in Kansas in their mom's basement, which was not the truth, even though Sean was living in Michigan, he had become very knowledgeable about the scene from hanging out with us, and he was a big fan. He knew a lot about the music stuff. So that was how the site was created, and it was in the early days of a thing called, I think they called it GeoCities, which was kind of like a hosting place where you could get a free little section and build your website, right. Which I didn't really understand a lot of it technically for the most part. Sean did much more than I did. And then over time, there was other people that kind of went and came along that said, hey, I can help you do this, this, and this. And I remember it was James Saki, Jim Bob Dwarf, who was a big fan in the Midwest and a big fan of music, but also a big Sludge fan. He was somebody that could say hey, I could make your site look better. And we were like, well, what do you mean? And for instance, he'd say, when we have Halloween for the month of October, I could create it so it was all orange and black with pumpkins. And when people clicked on the site, little bats would fly around the top.
Right.
And we're like, well, how does that work? And you go, well, I'll show you an example. So then he would send us, an animated GIF or, a little file, and we'd look at it. We'd be like, holy fuck, is that gnarly? Cool. We'll have moving bats on our site for October. And then we'll have a Santa, the little Santa character, putting a Christmas star on top of the sludge or whatever. So he kind of came along at one point and said, I can give you guys a better look. And for the record, he did not know who we were at that time. And neither did you if you had contributed. Or as I go down a list of Tracy Guns, Jizzy Pearl, Scott, Ian Robinson from MTV. I mean, there became tons of people that contributed stuff that would say hey, I want to write, but I don't want to be named. And we'd be like, okay, cool. And
didn't people think Ricky Rocket was running the site?
People thought Ricky was involved, which Ricky contributed at one point. He came up with, or we had kind of together with him came up with Dr. Rocket, which was kind of like a Ma Nuge, was Ted Nugent's mom, would answer questions. And we're like, hey, let's have a column where people ask questions to Ricky Rocket, hey, I went out with this guy and he's got a baby dick and I really like him and he's loaded, but his cock is like the size of a fucking snack sausage at New Year's. So what should I do? And then we'd have Ricky answer the question.
Which leads me into the penis section of the site.
Oh, yeah. Those were two other charts. I had come up with those as well.
The penis chart.
The penis chart and the hair chart, which was kind of like a hair club for men. Let's talk about, make notes or have little people make comments about rock stars that they went out with who were wearing wigs or were going bald or something like that.
Like a Kevin Dubrow, rest in peace.
Right. Follically challenged, whatever. So, you know, that was one chart, but the penis chart became an epic piece. I mean, to this very day, 18 years later, it still gets a lot of traffic, even though we haven't updated it in literally years. I mean, at one point there was close to 200 or 300 profiles on there with rock stars. And of course, you know, this was all based on, you know, girls commenting and sending us little tips, which we would say when we first launched it was like, hey, have you slept with a rock star? Did you fuck somebody? Did you suck his dick? Tell us what happened. Send your stuff here to Donna at metalsludge.com or whatever. And so these girls would be like, yeah, I went out with so-and-so and man, he was so drunk he couldn't get it up, but you know, and then his girlfriend called and he told me to be quiet, so I went in the bathroom and went through his duffel bag when he wasn't looking and just crazy stuff.
Like I remember someone from Quiet Riot, you said, or not you, but whoever.
Yeah, don't put my name in all this. So.
Said there's no riot going on in his pants.
So, you know, those, and it was, the whole thing was just, I mean, we didn't know what the internet was. I mean, nobody fucking knew what the internet was at that point. I mean, this was, to anybody that's under the age of 25 or even under the age of 30, who was only about 10 when this launched, there was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, there was no YouTube, there was no MySpace, there was no Instagram, there was no iTunes, there was none of that existed. There was no Spotify, no video channels, no Vimeos,
no
nothing.
iTunes.
It was basically, we created the first social networks for this genre of fan and music. So anybody that really liked the 80s or the Sunset Strip or hard rock or Headbangers Ball, everybody that had lost touch with a lot of that, because all that stuff had been kind of removed from magazines. At this point, between 94 and 96, 97, 98, it was Marilyn Manson.
Boy bands,
Limp Bizkit, Kid Rock, Power Man 5000, Monster Magnet. The only occasional blurb you'd see would be something about if Axl Rose was on the cover of Rolling Stone and they'd be like, he's still making Chinese Democracy. It's been 6 years or 7 years, or now it's 9 years. And there's another new guitarist, you know, named Buckethead, who wears a KFC bucket on his head and a raincoat and twirls nunchucks for a solo. And that was in Spin Magazine or maybe Rolling Stone or occasionally in some kind of a print. But nothing else existed for hair bands, you know. I think one of the first things that started going out for a summer tour was the Rock Never Stops tour.
Oh, it stopped.
And that would be like Poison Warrant and Slaughter, or, you know, Winger,
Dokken,
and, you know,
Piercy, maybe.
LA Guns. And so we, you know, we mocked everything. You know, Rock Never Stops was Rock Always Sucks tour, you know, or something like that. And the crazy thing is that doing this site and building it and creating it, and the fans that followed it, there was a few different people that were trying to figure out, like, not a few, but there was a lot of people trying to figure out, like, who are these people? And there was a few guys in the industry that kept saying, oh, they hate hair bands. They hate everything about them. All they do is they bash people. And it's funny because we said it before and we still say it. I love this industry. You know, I loved it, you know. I was a huge fan of everything from Slick Toxic to the Sleazebees and Nitro and King of the Hill and Kick Tracy and all the total D-listers. Tough, right in that same category, my own band. I loved all that stuff. And I hailed, the Skid Rows and the Rats and the Motley Crues and the
Vinnie
Poisons
Vincent.
and the Guns N' Roses, and all those bands. I loved it. But for anybody that really knows me as a person that hasn't sat with me in a, in a tour bus or backstage or even, hanging at a club, I'm always kind of busting balls. It's not just talking shit. I'm always just busting balls. I'm a ball buster. I do that with my friends. I do that with my children. I make little goofy comments about them and they look at me like, okay, daddy's a little nutty sometimes. So, I mean, I don't really hate any of these bands. I never did, and I'm not making, I'm not trying to make them cry, but some of them who have done so. I mean, there's a couple of guys, Sebastian Bach, Bobby Blotzer, are two of the few, because there's literally only a few, who really kind of whined about it, and have continued to whine about it and have held this grudge like I've, ruined their life or attacked them. Or I love Skid Row. I love those first couple records that they did. I think Sebastian was a great performer, great singer, but you can't help but mock or make fun of the guy, with some of the things he's done over the years. And, when a guy got arrested or got a DUI or got arrested for drugs or had a altercation with another band member, or, they came to his house and they found, plastic containers of dead dogs in his kitchen. How can you not make...
That was Vinnie Vincent.
That was Vinnie Vincent, exactly.
He was just saving them.
Yeah. So, and so we've kind of, taken a pot shot at everybody at one point. And, the thing is, over years, which Metal Sludge went that way, in the anonymous world for 1998, 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, the pressure was beginning to build more and more because the internet was getting bigger. People were getting more, educated and knowledgeable about it. And even me, myself, like I said, living here, I would go to a club and then people would go, dude, did you see the new 20 questions on Metal Sludge today? Oh my God, that was hysterical. I read this, I read that. And I'm supposed to go, yeah, that was awesome. Anyways, what are we getting to eat again? Are we getting a pizza? Like, I'm trying to enjoy the conversation, but I'm trying to steer away from it because, I'm the guy that helped facilitate part of that interview and part of that content. And it was just getting harder to put a game face on, So I was at that point by 2003 and 2004 was like, man, we got to realign this.
Well, I remember being at parties, at concerts, and people would be whispering, I wonder if they're here. Like you guys were the fucking X-Files.
ISIS.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, taking Eric Singer and Stefan Adika and two other people to a Kiss concert, and the whole car ride down to the show is like, who are those guys? How do they get this information? It was like James Bond villains.
It really was a fun period, and I think that most people will agree. I mean, it was a really cool time, and going forward, it was just like I said, man, we have to quote unquote come out of the closet. We were starting to get offers. We were getting, we were doing some pretty big business that was, pushing into six figures annually. And it's kind of hard to go cash checks paid to Bastard Boy Floyd for $4,000. It's like,
why would that be?
Mr. Bon Neil, yeah, here's your money. It's like, it was just, we were having to be a little bit more legit, and it was hard to continue to hide that. I mean, here's what's funny. I can tell you, I lived at the time in the Van Nuys, Sherman Oaks area. And at one point we launched a merchandise line, which we called Sludge and Dice. And we had t-shirts and baby dolls and panties and trucker hats and ski hats, custom jerseys. I mean, we had all this stuff. And I remember we had a month once in December that was like $25,000 in Sludge and Dice sales. And so it was becoming, like my garage was like a half a warehouse of shelving full of all these different, and then if you remember, we had specific styles like the Bullet Boy blue was the color, or Skid Row red, or Poison neon green. So we had all these different colors, and then the sizes were from like small to triple X, and I mean, we were carrying 5 colors at a time, of all sizes. And then the barbed wire shirt, the sex, sludge, and rock and roll. And I remember I would sometimes have 20 or 30 packages per day. And so I used to go to this post office in Sherman Oaks all the time. And I'm standing in line. And at one point, I'm standing in line. I got 3 or 4 of these plastic containers full of packages. And right behind me in line is Carlos Cavazzo, who was at the point, maybe he was still in Quiet Riot, but I recognized him. And I'm like, I didn't really know Carlos ever. I'd probably met him in passing, but he's standing right behind me. And at my feet are 30 packages. And the return on all of them is, a stamp that says MSENT, Metal Sludge Entertainment. But I always made sure that all my packages were upside down. And so I remember being in line with Carlos Cavazzo behind me, and I'm sitting here with all this sludge stuff. And then another visit, one of your buddies, I remember being in line, and Bruce Kulick was ahead of me. And he was doing his Audio Dog CDs at one point. And he turned around. He's like, "Hey, Stevie, how are you? Like, what's up?" I was like, "Oh, just mailing some tough stuff." Yeah. And so there was multiple incidents where I had close. I was literally in line. Another time I was in line with Chris Von Dahl. Now, do you know who that is? Testing it.
From a grunge band.
No. Chris Van Dahl was the singer of Cherry Street. And he's now in a very successful Aerosmith tribute. He's a Steven Tyler impersonator. And he's doing great with it. As a matter of fact, we're doing a little feature on him coming up on Sludge. So I was in line another time when he was in line at the post office. Sherman Oaks, Galleria area. This is kind of a hip little area. A few, celebrity rock stars and models or whatever living over there. But and like I said, going to the clubs or people just come up to me and go, "Hey man, I saw this on Sludge and they mentioned, they mentioned you on Rate a Singer. Somebody gave you a 3 because they said you sucked or something, Right. So it was just getting harder and harder to just fly under the radar, And so that in a nutshell is kind of how Metal Sludge was created and came to be. And it's now, like I said, we're pushing into the 18th year.
But you guys are like the Inquirer, where you aren't taken seriously, but you have some great scoops and reporting. Like the Great White Fire. You guys had great coverage on that,
right?
And any unfortunate, like the recent passing of AJ Pero, the drummer from Twisted Sister. You guys had great, not scoop, but we
coverage. Were actually one of the first ones on the Dimebag thing as well, and rest in peace to all those people, fans and the stars themselves. I remember because we had not only the site, but we have the message board, which is a community of, at one point we had literally between 20 and 30,000 registered members. So that community on there, which a lot of people look at as, oh, they're all negative or there's a lot of haters. But out of those thousands and thousands of people, at any given time, there's hundreds, maybe even 600, 800, 1,000 or 1,200 logged on at a time. And some of those people are really into Motley Crue. Some are really into Kiss. Some are really into Rat. Some really like the Choir Boys from London. Some really like, Ugly Kid Joe. I mean, and so what happens is whoever their favorite band is, when something happens in that world, they'll immediately go, "Hey, I just see the new Alice Cooper dates and he hired a new guitar player. It's a chick. She's really hot. Check it out." And so all that stuff kind of is just turning all day long with information. And I remember being online and being on the boards. And then we got a message that somebody said there was a shooting at the El Rosa Villa and somebody said Dimebag Darrell's been killed. And I was like, huh? And so then I went on the boards and some people started talking to it. And there was a fan, I think his ID is Monty610. He's a guy from Columbus, Ohio. And I had known him as a fan, and he had communicated with us through Sludge. And then he said something about the show and then mentioned, like there's a Red Roof Inn next door and a pizza place. And I played there and I kind of knew the area. And when he started making commentary on it, and they're like, yeah, it's on the local news right now, blah, blah, blah. We found out within literally 15 minutes of it happening. So we kind of grabbed it and started, doing updates. And the same thing with the Great White Fire. People were telling friends something had happened. And at this point, cell phones had already kind of come in and texting started happening. So like you said, we don't always get taken seriously, but we've absolutely broke scoops on some big stories. We broke the story that DJ Ashford was a guitarist in Guns N' Roses. And little things like that have happened over the years. But, when you say National Enquirer, we don't report, there was a Bigfoot spotted at the LA Guns concert. we don't announce that, but, that
was just Jerry Miller.
Right, exactly. We absolutely have broken some huge stories, over the years. And that's not just from us or because of us. That's because of our fans and the fan base and the supporters of the site that feed us that stuff. Same way they would feed it to TMZ,
Yeah, you guys are almost like a combo TMZ, National Enquirer and legitimate news source.
Right.
And if you're a fan of even the most obscure band, like a Shark Island, there'll be a thread on Shark Island
right.
And I'm still trying to find Richard Black. After you, he's my must-see interview. I can't find the guy.
I was never a big fan of them. I remember them. I probably saw them at the Roxy.
When they were the Sharks or Shark Island?
No, Shark Island. I think we might even have played a show with them. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure we did at one point.
But weren't they pretty big on the Strip more when they were the Sharks?
Was that before they were Shark Island?
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't here then because I moved here in June of '87. So I was probably just a little post. Like I wasn't here when Poison was local or Guns N' Roses. Their record hadn't come out yet, but they had just, eclipsed we're now, signed to a label and about to release a record. So they weren't like playing, clubs anymore at that point.
Right. They were, now Tracy Guns was out of the picture for them, right, at that time.
Who, Tracy Guns was out of the LA?
Because, a lot of people, as crazy as this sounds to you and me, don't realize that he is the Guns.
Right.
And Guns N' Roses.
Correct.
And they're
correct.
Like, well, where was he in the picture?
Yeah, he was, I think he was in 85 or something. And by early 86, then he was out. And that's when he took his name and just called it LA Guns. And then there was two, his version. And then Axl kept Guns N' Roses,
And Slash, how true are the rumors that Slash actually tried out for Poison?
It is true. I think if you read, maybe even read in, I don't know if he talks about it in his book, but he absolutely auditioned for Poison.
No, how do you
from what I've heard from a lot of sources over the years.
I remember the story as he came in like moccasin boots and like hippie-esque clothing, and then Cece came in, with like pink shoes on, and like, okay, this is our guy.
Right. Well, the thing is this too. It's even evident in some of the earliest shots of Guns N' Roses that hit press, or even in their first video. Their sound was definitely dirtier, but they had a hairband vibe. Axl was wearing purple eyeshadow, pink lipstick, and his hair was red and ratted to the ceiling. There's pictures of Slash with purple eyeshadow on, and Duff is wearing eyeliner and lipstick and bleached hair and rouge on his cheekbones, and but they clearly dirtied it up pretty quickly and kind of dropped some of that glam side.
They were almost, I almost think of them as one of the first, not grunge acts, but they were like, to me, one of the first bands to like make bands like the Vinnie Vincent Invasion look ridiculous.
Well, honestly, I thought Vinnie Vincent Invasion looked ridiculous to begin with. I just thought that it was just, everything was so over the top, And for the record, and on the record, Tough opened up for the Vinnie Vincent Invasion at the Palace for one of their last ever shows. And I mean, I thought, Mark looked cool and sang great. And they all looked cool, I guess, to an extent. But Vinnie wanted everything like, can your hair be 10 inches high? No, we want our hair 14 inches high. Do I want a flying V? No, I want a guitar that's 2 flying Vs glued together. I mean, it was just everything was really, really not just have a drum fill, but like Bobby Rock was doing quadruplet, triplets, like, and the guitar was like, it was just like, it was like Nitro-ish, it was just complete over the top mayhem, and by the time they fell apart, and then obviously the guys went on and formed Slaughter, and they kind of took away some of the over the topness. They ended up with a platinum record, like out of the box, I mean, I think they just kind of like took some of that edge off, and Dana was obviously the guy that produced all that. But Vinny's theory was more is more, not less is more,
That's why I liked him in Kiss, because as crazy as Gene and Paul are, I think they kind of reined him in. Right. And he was good for them.
He kind of added a little bit of flair.
Yeah, and this was, I don't think Ace Frehley could have played in the 80s in Kiss.
No, he wasn't nearly as good of a player,
Yeah, I mean, they wanted like a Randy Rhoads, Jakey Lee, vibe. And then, Mark St. John, rest in peace, came in. One album. And then the great Bruce Kulick.
Right.
And, the rest is history.
History, exactly.
Now, let's get to Tough, because here, I'm fascinated by how some bands made it, some bands didn't. You guys got a lot of play on MTV. I thought you were Poison-like. Well, I mean, why did Poison get huge, Tough not so huge?
Well, for starters, I will say that it is officially the 30th anniversary of Tough. Tough came to be in 1985 in Phoenix with George and Todd, and I think they even had a couple of different drummers in and out for a show or two. And their original singer was a guy named Terry Fox, who within 6 months or 9 months of them playing some shows, he left the band to pursue a professional ice skating career. So a lot of people don't know that, but some do. But yeah, he became a professional ice skater. And then they got, and then Michael at that point was already the drummer. And then they brought in Jim Gillette, who was Jimmy L'Amour at the time. And Gillette was obviously had an insane ability to scream really high.
Couldn't he break a glass or so? Or was that
was a little later in Nitro? Yeah, but he was like the singer that could, scream. And so they played with him for about a year in Phoenix, I think, and then they moved to Los Angeles in the fall of '86. And they played a handful of shows, like a country club, a Gazzarri's, a Troubadour with Jimmy. But then Gillette wanted to leave the band because he wanted to play heavier music. He was basically kind of, at that point, he'd already started doing his vocal lessons, metal power vocal lessons, which was kind of a take on what Doug Marks had done as a guitar lesson thing, in Hip Prater. And Jimmy took what he had learned from a vocal teacher, an old operatic singer who would teach him vocals, and then a piano go, do this, doon, 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 minor, minor, mine, minor, minor, mine, minor, minor, mine, these little scales. And he took what he learned from her and packaged it with a cool rock and roll dude who was 20 years old with long blonde hair and a leather jacket, put the ads out, and it started exploding, and aside from packaging it, Jimmy did have the look. And he did have that ability. He could really sing amazing stuff, could really sing in key, could scream like so high for so long. And I will say this, sidebarring out of Tough here for a second, Jim had always been, and still is to this day, he's always an extremist in whatever he did. Whether it was tattoos, get $1 million. Hair extensions, to my waist.
MMA.
MMA fighting. Now he's just like he's been training for a long time. His kids are training. Whatever he did was extreme. So him taking vocal lessons and saying to himself, he wasn't a guy that said, "Hey, I want to go out and hang out on Friday night and party and rock and roll." He was singing all day, practicing. His voice became so strong. He had the ability to sing so high that was his theory, and it was like, hey, I'm going to form this band called Nitro. I want the fastest guitar player, the highest screamer, which is me. Then we're going to get a drummer who can play insane, which was Bobby Rock at one point. And so he went on to form Nitro, and they needed a singer. And I ended up finding out they were looking for this singer, and they wanted somebody who was in the vein of a David Lee Roth, Vince Neil, or Bret Michaels, who had just at the time just started to break. And I was in Wisconsin playing around in my local bands, and I saw this advertisement through a friend who had come back from LA, and he had a bunch of flyers from the Strip, and he had like Rock City News and BAM and a bunch of stuff. And I was looking through it all. I remember seeing a flyer for Hans Naughty, 22 Ski-Doo. There might have been a Leatherwolf flyer in there. All stuff that was really popular in like 86, 87. And then there was this band Tough, and there was like 4 squares, a picture of George, a picture of Michael, a picture of Todd, and then an empty square that said singer wanted, David Lee Roth, Vince Neil, etc. And I was like, holy fuck, that's me, Right. And I was playing in Wisconsin, but I had been playing a couple years and already had thought about going to LA and wanted to go to LA, but was kind of waiting for my time. And when I saw that flyer, I was like, this is my gig, and I tried to call. I called a number, and it was the Rocking Horse Studios in Canoga Park. And the lady said, yeah, they're accepting auditions. You need to send a promo package with your 8x10 and your demo tape. And I started to put that together. I'd already done a couple demos. I took some photos, but I wasn't convinced it was as convincing as I could be in person. And I literally got that flyer from a friend on a Friday, and I made the decision on that next day, on Saturday, I'm going to buy a plane ticket. I'm going to fly to LA. And I lived in an apartment. I had 2 jobs. I moved everything out of and I didn't live in an apartment by myself. I lived with 2 girls, actually. It was like a threes company.
I bet.
But there was no Chrissy. One of the girls looked more like you, only larger. So she was
my type. What's her number?
She wasn't that hot. No, she was a big chick, and she just wasn't. She was kind of manly looking.
Did you ever have sex with her?
Never did anything. But there was the other girl was cuter, and she was into gymnastics, and I think I might have like stole some of her underwear out of the hamper once and beat off with them or something. Swear to God.
No, you don't have to say that. It's not like that's an unbelievable story.
So at this point, I'm 20, 21 years old. I'm living with these 2 girls in this college house, and I was renting a room. But I'm like, I'm going to LA. So I went home. I told my mom, I said, you know what? I'm going to buy a ticket. I'm going to fly to LA. I'm going to try out for this band. I'm putting all my stuff in the basement. So I put everything in my green LTD car that I had, loaded it up, took it to my mom's, milk crates of tapes or whatever I had, dresser. And I put it all in the basement. And on Monday, I went to Fox Valley Travel in downtown Oshkosh, and I bought a one-way ticket from O'Hare Airport to LAX. And I recently found a folder in my file cabinet with the receipt. My ticket was $109.
Oh.
And I flew here that Thursday. So from the time I saw the flyer until the time I landed at LAX was 6 days. And so once I got to LA, I was staying with a girl I knew who was a friend from Milwaukee. And then I called that Rocking Horse Studios the next day, and I said, hey, I'm in Los Angeles. I want to meet the guys in Tough. Can you tell them I'm interested to talk to them? My name is Steve. Here's my phone number, blah, blah, blah. Fast forward three days later or something, they called me. And then they said, we want to meet you. And then we met, we hung out. They played me their tape. I played them played them mine. They played me theirs. And like a week later, we rehearsed. We couldn't rehearse right away. The drummer had to leave out of town for a couple of days or something. We rehearsed. And then it was like the first week of July, they told me I'm the singer.
Like, what songs did you audition for? I mean, like,
Forever Yours,
great.
probably off their original demo, Candy Coated, Dress for Dancing, like these really glammy. It was pretty much like Look What the Cat Dragged In side 3. I mean, it was very, very, very poppy glammy. And then once I got in the band, Michael, the drummer, was the leader. He was kind of the business guy. He booked us a show, and we were on second slot opening for Warrant at the Roxy in August.
That's a big gig.
Late August. Yeah, because Warrant was already pretty big news at that point. But if you remember, the way they did it then is there was 5 bands. There was a first slot, a second slot, a support slot, headliner was Warrant was 4th, and then the cleanup band was last.
And that's not a good spot.
No, because everyone's backstage or leaving or in the parking lot or,
fucking at some...
behind a dumpster.
in the alley behind Dantana's.
So we were the second slot band, and Paradise was the third. And when I say Paradise, I mean pair of dice, as in 2 dice.
Right.
And for the LA locals, you'll know that there was the Paradise as in dice and Paradise as in like Paradise Island. So that was our first show in August. In September, we went to Phoenix and we played a show with a band called Mistreated, who remnants of that band became Asphalt Ballet. They were based out of San Diego. Then we came back to LA and we played first slot at the Troubadour, opening up for Mon Cherie and Clockwork Orange. And we were the first slot band, and we had the most people, the biggest crowd, sold the most tickets. And that was like early October. And then we got an offer, as I drop names, we got an offer from a girl named Janie who had a company called Razzmatazz. She was like a high school girl that was a big fan and working locally. She had this little promo company called Razzmatazz Promotions, and she booked us to headline the Whiskey on November 6th of 1987 and paid us $500. And so that was our first headlining show. It was our 4th show together. And that Janie, who I dated for a short time,
what's a short time for you?
Fooled around, hung out a couple times, went to lunch, blah, 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 a few months. Still remained friends all these years later. And fast forward to today, she is actually Mrs. Van Halen right now.
Really?
That's Eddie Van Halen's wife.
Well, we're going to get to
Janie Liszewski.
We're going to get to your womanizing a little later. Okay. This might be a 2-parter, to be honest with you. I mean, we haven't even scratched the surface with...
I'm all good.
Yeah, no, but we're gonna stick on Tough for now because
Tough? Okay.
I mean, 87 is. Would you say this was starting to enter the home stretch of the peak of the scene?
Well, yeah. I mean, at this point, think about it. Los Angeles had just spit out Poison, who got a small record deal, put out Cry Tough, was on Headbangers Ball, was on tour opening up for Great White or Quiet Riot. But nothing had really happened with them. I saw them in 86 in Wisconsin, open for Quiet Riot. And I actually hung out with them afterwards and I had met Ricky Rocket, and he told us, we're going to go home and film a new video for a new single, which I don't think they knew what the single was going to be at that time. This was like September, October of 86. And then they went home and filmed, obviously, Talk Dirty to Me, which was released like in December or January. And then it exploded. So by January of 87, Poison was suddenly, on the charts, and within 6 months sold 3 million records. And at that, on the heels of that, as that was happening, I think everybody was getting a record deal. Faster Pussycat got signed, LA Guns got signed, Guns N' Roses got signed, and then there was just everybody was lining up. I mean, Warrant was next out of the line. DeMalls had got a record deal.
Brittany Fox.
Well, Brittany Fox was in Philly, but, I'm just keeping to the Sunset Strip here. And then, the Salty Dog got signed to Geffen. Pretty Boy Floyd got soon signed after that, in 88, 89. And so, yeah, then there was just like a lot of bands got record deals. And I think a lot of it was based off the fact that Poison were a club band that everybody said, oh, they're not good enough. They're not good musicians, and they did a record in like 10 days for very low budget. And it went on to sell millions. And, outside of Motley and probably Guns N' Roses, I mean, they're the biggest seller and the one with the biggest main long standing stamina here 30 years later. They're still very relevant with that brand,
Oh yeah, I think people forget CeCe DeVille was like a classically trained guitarist.
He's a much better player than a lot of people ever gave him credit for. CeCe was very, and I'm not a fan of Led Zeppelin, but I remember hanging out with him a few times, and he was with like James Kotak, who was playing drums, and some other musicians, Jimmy Bain on bass, and they were like just, CeCe was talking, B-side, rare release. He knew all the riffs, all the parts, was a huge Jimmy Page fan. He definitely knew his craft, Well,
didn't he do the solo for Cherry Pie?
He may
one
have,
of Warren's hits.
I know CeCe did play guitar and some Warrant stuff.
So how bad could he have been if other bands, competitors especially, are saying, "Hey, can you
right?
Help
no,
us
he
out?"
Absolutely was a great player, and he is a great player.
Do you think a lot of guys from that era don't get credit for their abilities just because of how they looked, like a Warren DeMartini? You look at some early Rat photos; they look like fucking gay pirates,
right? Yeah, I think that
Winger, etc.
The whole band Wingers, all very. Rod Morgenstein, I believe, is the drummer's name. He's an insane level drummer.
Fusion drummer.
Yeah, and Kip, he was playing obviously bass for Alice Cooper, and then
in the Kane Roberts era.
Yeah, and so all those guys are very accomplished, and they're very educated and know their craft. Even a guy like, guys like Kerry Kelly or Robbie Crane, who have been playing in and out of a lot of bands in the last few years. Those guys are not just guys that know a bunch of great cover songs. Those guys you can sit down with and they can help rewire their own guitars or amps and know, different tunings and a lot of different, like Kerry Kelly, for instance. I remember he came to play a couple shows for us once. We needed him to fill in, and he showed up at rehearsal and he asked me what songs. I gave him a couple CDs. He learned them, and he came in, and at one point he flipped open his guitar case and he had a legal pad there with sheet music in it and a bunch of notes. And I had never seen that, in a rock and roll setting where we're in rehearsal and I'm like, yeah, Rock a Pit Bridge. And he'd be like, cool. And he, flipped the page and he put on his little readers and he sat there with his guitar and he had charted our music,
Right.
And I was like, fuck, and he played it great, and added his own flavor, but he's very accomplished. You don't get in Slash's band. He played guitar with Slash. You're not going to get in Slash's band or in Alice Cooper and Rat and then be on call for guys that might need you from Night Ranger and Warrant Skid Row if you just have cool hair and a fucking, badass jacket. That doesn't happen anymore,
Damn it. Well, like you mentioned Night Ranger, I always thought the guy like Brad Gillis never gets credit. He's not really our genre of music, but yeah, that guy's a great player.
No, absolutely. He played obviously with Ozzy, and then Night Ranger is a great band, and he's a ripper.
Even the Jeff Watson, his cohort in Night Ranger,
right?
And Joel, I'm going to butcher his last name.
Holkstra.
Isn't he in Whitesnake now? He's
played in some projects. He's kind of like what Carrie has done, and Doug Aldrich and some of those guys. They've they were around and they might have been involved in some projects. Doug was in Lion, which had a release or two, but probably didn't do anything on the radar. But they kept kept working and stayed in this industry to a point where now they their talents are being utilized elsewhere. That was a little press recently when Dee Schneider made a comment about Doug, like what Whitesnake record did Doug Aldrich contribute to? And Doug wasn't in Whitesnake in the prime era, between the late 70s through the 80s and early 90s. But he's been in the band, in and out of the band, and played with them in recent years, and obviously is a world-class rock guitarist. just like Brian Tishy's a world-class rock drummer, but he hadn't played on a lot of those great classical records, but he toured with
Billy Idol.
He's doing, a ton of stuff. Foreigner, and he's a very in-demand guy because of how good of a player he is. And not just player, but person and professional and holding all those qualities,
No, by the way, I love the new Billy Idol record just for the record.
Billy Idol was also on the Tough Flyer, which I have this, I think my mom has it. Wanted lead singer in the vein of David Lee Roth, Vince Neil, Billy Idol, Robin Zander, Bret Michaels. That's what it said.
Right.
And those are all bands that I loved. I love Cheap Trick. I saw Billy Idol in 1984. I remember those first couple records. Great stuff.
Oh, I mean, it's him and Steve Stevens. It's just such a great...
Steve's a good guy.
Steve looks like a Jersey Shore housewife. But...
Steve's a good guy, and his wife's a good girl. Love them both. Steve and Josie.
Steve's another guy who I think I played someone he did an album called Flamenco A Go-Go.
Mm-hmm.
Just solo album, and the person I said, just listen to this. They're like, wow, this is amazing. Who is this? And I pull up a picture of Steve, and it's like, oh, like the look and image is like, oh.
No, he's a world-class guitarist. Obviously, he's done some great things. I mean, he played with Michael Jackson, I mean, that in its own right is a pretty huge...
Dirty Diana, the solo.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't know this. He did the instrumental on the beautiful instrumental on the Top Gun soundtrack.
Okay, I didn't know that.
With Harold Faltermeyer. They did this was, I think, the pinnacle of the 80s for me. That video they did, the Top Gun was 86, so it probably came out 86, 87, but they probably spent millions on this video of him in an airport hangar with all these jets, and it was just like excess. And he's got this all shiny silver one-piece jumpsuit on.
Right.
It's like, this is rock and roll. Very tough. Not quite as good as your picture in the towel, the centerfold.
Yeah, the towel picture is still, it's still haunting me many years later. All walks of life and people that I know occasionally will be like, people that didn't know me then and know me now will be like, dude, what is this? And that absolutely is, but hey, I'm not ashamed of it. It is what it is. I was 21. I was in Teen Magazine, Teen Machine, Rock Hunks,
Frontiers.
I was in all kinds of rock, teeny bopper magazines with those crazy photos, but it is what it is.
No. I mean, listen, if I didn't know how many women you've been with, I think this guy is gayer than Tom Hanks at the end of Philadelphia. But that was I want to steer it back to Tough. Like, was it like when you guys see Poison kind of just blowing up, was there a sense in Tough of what do we have to do what are they doing we're not doing?
Well, the thing is, seeing a band and liking them or being influenced by it's like people, when you say the comparison, like everybody assumed, okay, now that Poison has sold 3 million records and they're in all the magazines, okay, hey, there's this guy, here's Tough. I mean, me and Bret are a couple years apart. He's a Midwest guy. I'm a Midwest guy. I have German roots. I think he's part German. We both had blonde hair, blue eyes, and we both grew up loving Van Halen and Vince Neil. So, I mean, I wanted long hair and I wanted to be in a rock band and wear sexy pants and grab my crotch and have girls scream, and throw beer and water on people. I mean, I was just doing a party rock and roll vibe. That's what I was doing, based on what I had learned from David Lee Roth or Vince Neil. And I think he did the same. And it's funny when Poison actually became big and now was becoming a national band, because at this point there was no internets, there was none of that stuff. When Poison finally came out, we're on Headbangers Ball, there was some friends of mine from high school that knew I had started playing in a band and knew I was kind of, and a singer. And suddenly there was like some rumors going around town like, hey, Steve's band is on Headbangers Ball. So some local people in Wisconsin who had no idea who Poison was had seen this Cry Tough video on Headbangers Ball, and they said, hey, Steve's on Headbangers Ball. Like, these were people that hadn't seen me in a few years and knew I was in a band, but there was, me and Bret obviously looked very similar. I wasn't trying to look like Brett. I mean, people had like one point going, "Oh, Stevie, the guys in Tough are getting plastic surgery so they can look like Poison." Yeah, right. We're living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Van Nuys with 8 guys, roadies, whatever, and barely eating top ramen. We weren't getting plastic surgery to look like Poison. We just, that was just the flavor. I mean, Loudness looked like, if you had put a little covering over their Asian faces, you would have thought, hey, there's Shout at the Devil. I mean, everybody was kind of following. Motley was kind of being compared to Kiss, and Wasp was being compared to Motley, and that whole black leather, saw blades, chain spikes. Fast forward a few more years, now suddenly Poison, and is becoming a little poppy, and then even at that point, Motley was wearing, like, Vince is wearing the pink stuff, and Nikki Sixx is wearing the polka dotted or the stripe thing, which, Bobby Dahl at one point had something similar. Everybody was kind of borrowing from each other and favoring each other in the way of, that standard rock look. And, we just did what we liked, and I think we were always a little harder than Poison. I think our guitar sound, or our general sound is a little bit more maybe heavy metal. I mean, So Many Seasons, Forever Yours, those are poppy songs, but Good Guys Wear Black, Ain't Worth a Dime, those were more kind of a little Judas Priestish with the chorus, and so that wasn't the way we were, setting out to be one or the other. I think we were still trying to find ourselves. We weren't totally pop. We weren't totally metal. We were kind of mixed, Do
you think that was maybe why you guys never got to that Poison level? Like, because you weren't like, because a lot of bands, I think, were kind of caught in the middle of, do we go glam or do we stay to our roots?
Who's a great example of that is Black and Blue. Black and Blue was a great band. Right there is that they're in my top 5 all time. I love Jamie St. James. I love Black and Blue. Those first few records were amazing. I mean, all those records. I think they did like 4 on Geffen, but they were they had more of a hard rock, heavy metal sound. Auto Blast, Hold On to 18. That was metal, but it wasn't thrash. It wasn't as heavy as Metallica. But because of how much Image was becoming so important, what Vince Neil and Motley Crue looked like, what Piercy and Robin Crosby looked like, what Poison was becoming, that suddenly Black and Blue is like, and even Keel is being kind of pushed to go put on a sparkly top, put on some, Jamie St. James had this bodysuit.
Oh, I love that bodysuit.
I love Jamie St. James. I love that band, but that was the gayest fucking suit ever. Well, and some of the spandex that people had was just so, and at one point the drummer wore a diaper.
Yeah, I was going to say in the Hold On to 18 video, he's wearing like these dolphin shorts. It's like, dude, did you not want to dress up for this video?
I mean, and again, I loved Black and Blue. I thought they were amazing. But at one point, the drummer's in a diaper, and poor Jeff Whoop Warner was balding way before anybody. Yeah. And it was like, at that point, it was so not cool to be looking like Phil Collins. And I mean, Phil Collins, the singer of Genesis. And it was like, poor
I think Patrick had he was trying to do the Piercy where the one side of his head was not shaved, but like very short, and they looked like an Amber Alert line.
Yeah, I mean, Black and Blue was, they were, the image was lost with them. They weren't metal, they weren't heavy metal, they weren't pop. They were just kind of in the middle, and didn't Gene produce most of their records?
I think Gene produced their last
couple of them,
semi-big one, and that's when they went downhill.
Thanks,
and totally
Gene.
ripped
Thanks,
off.
Gene, you ruined Black and Blue.
Domino, the Kiss song Domino, is a complete ripoff of one of the Black and Blue songs. I mean, it's like note for note.
Little did Black and Blue know that Gene was just getting ready to farm out their guitar player and steal him. But yeah, I mean, so that's where Image became, it played where, again, Black and Blue had some great songs. They had some great riffs, great hooks. Dude, they were signed to Geffen Records. I mean, they had a label that was just exploding, but at the end of the day, you have to realize as a musician that not everybody can win. Right. Everybody can't become Fred Durst. Everybody can't become Axl Rose. Everybody can't become Kid Rock. So you have to find your place, you know? Everybody can't become Bret Michaels. I mean, think about what Bret's done. Aside from Poison, he's become, you know, level A list, you know? I mean, he's won Donald Trump's Celebrity Apprentice TV show, and, you know, he's just built a brand you know, that's way above and beyond what anyone could have imagined.
Now, do you think the other three guys in Poison, I mean, obviously they benefit to a degree from that, because when Poison goes out, they're bigger crowds, and
right.
But do you think they're like, let's just make some good music?
Yeah, I would think that they probably are a little stressed out, and probably could be bummed out that Bret's able to do whatever he wants without them and still draw crowds and have these huge, you know, endorsements and company related projects, you know, Rock My RV or whatever these TV shows that he keeps doing.
Rock of Love
was the catalyst. That was like something that really, really catapulted him. And I'll bet you know what, in the beginning, he probably didn't get very much money for that. It was kind of scoffed at and made fun of. I mean, I think we kind of goofed on it on Metal Sludge, but that little TV show turned into, you know, a big deal. I mean, at one point it was spoofed on Saturday Night Live, you know, and, you know, it's become, you know, that helped him push himself to a level that no one probably had imagined, you know?
But let me ask you this, because you're in the scene. What whores went on season 2 that didn't see season 1? Like, who would go, I don't think this guy's looking for love?
Yeah, I mean,
because there's like 4 seasons.
Yeah, well, it's like at this point, and again, it was relatively, I don't want to say it was early in the reality TV show thing, because Flavor of Love had already, or Flavor of Love with Flavor Flav had already been on.
Boy.
And you know, I mean, other celebrity or not celebrity, other reality shows have already taken place. So people have got to realize that this is scripted. It is a show. It is.
Oh, really?
You know, but I mean, at one point there was probably some girls that didn't know and really thought like, you know, this could be something big for me. But again, some of those girls were 22 years old. They were 23.
Oh.
And they were stripping, you know, at Bob's Cabaret or in Denver or something, and maybe some of them were a little smarter and thought, okay, this is my chance to get to Hollywood or to be on TV and make a little name for myself for 6 months or a year, which some of them did. And like a porn star, they could then go feature and say, you know,
from Rock of
Juliet
Love.
From Rock of Love season 2 at, you know, Bottle Tops this Friday, you know, $10 at the door. And now, you know, she gets to go take her top off and jump around and maybe make a couple $1,000s for the night.
I've done comedy at Bottle Tops, great club. But I mean, no, but that show was so big at one point. I think that Daisy Girl and
Daisy of Love,
Megan, she got her own show, which one of the contestants ended up being a serial killer or something, like in real life.
Right.
So I mean, you know, a show's big when these girls are getting their own shows.
Yeah, I mean, Rock of Love, I definitely think hit some insane numbers. You know, they did insane numbers that really had not been seen probably by VH1's headquarters. I mean, they definitely really hit the nail on the head with that one.
I know they had. I think before that, their only other really kind of hit show was Dr. Drew's show, which, you know, his patients were dying at a clip of like Malaysian Airlines disappearing. No, I mean, you know, it's like
right.
Jeff Conway,
right?
You know, the Mike Starr, I think,
right, from Alice in Chains,
and a couple others. Yeah, I don't think Dr. Drew was the best doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Where did he get his degree from? The place the professor from?
I mean, he's a guy that, you know, I mean, I never heard his name before 5 years ago, but it seemed like whether it was NBC or CNN or, I mean, Dr. Drew's name has been everywhere the last 5 years.
God bless him.
Yeah, he's like the Bret Michaels of doctors. I mean, he's just everywhere. You can't not see the guy, you know? So he's done something right to get, you know, to build a profile where people want him for FaceTime, to interview him. And I'm sure he's obviously very intelligent and has, you know, a career of medical behind him that helps make him legitimate for that, you know?
Well, I think he's about as legitimate as the professor from Gilligan's Island, but I mean,
he died, right? Like a year ago?
Yeah. But as you know, Stevie, there's no questions that are pre-planned with me.
Right.
I ask this question of every rock and roller I've had.
Right.
Joey Allen, Piercy, Tawny Katane, Bobby Brown.
Right.
We're going to have to get to the women you've been with in another episode.
We could do that.
Because that's a whole... That'll take another hour.
I have some stories. The 80s were amazing.
No, but it's... When did you guys know, the era's coming to an end? Because I think Nirvana, Pearl Jam, all those bands almost get too much credit.
Yeah, it wasn't... I mean, I say... it's funny, like even in my song American Hairband, the opening line I say is Kurt Cobain is gone, but I'm back wearing leather pants and a backwards hat. Did they help, make us disappear? Yeah, they did, just by the fact that they became the flavor of the week. Nirvana, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, all those bands were just as image oriented as our bands were. Their image was don't shave, don't brush your hair, have dreadlocks. I mean, it became so predictable by the mid 90s that almost every band that came out, they were starting to run out of names as well. And that's what happened with the 80s bands. At one point, there was like Dangerous Toys and Danger. There was Guns N' Roses and LA Guns, and there was Faster Pussycat and there was so many...
Nashville Pussy.
Yeah, Nashville Pussy. I mean, it became like... There's enough singers with blonde hair and a headband. We already had a Bret Michaels and a Vince Neil and a Ted Poley and a Sebastian Bach and a Janie Lane and now we got a Stevie Rachelle and I mean, at one point there wasn't anywhere to go with it anymore. Bands were running out of stuff. Like the guys in Danger were goofed by the singer from Train did a podcast with them and talked about asking Steve West, okay, so your band's called Danger, right? Yeah, we're called Danger. And your first single is called Naughty. Right, yeah, okay. Your next single is called Bang Bang. Like, what the fuck can you guys come up with? Can you drop one of the words? Can you change up the words? Like Naughty, Bang Bang, Danger. And that's kind of what happened with the 80s, is that Tough was absolutely like a Poison or like a Danger or like, Slaughter, Warrant, White, the White Thing, White Snake, White Lion, White Widow,
White Tiger with Mark St. John.
The W bands, as Dee Snider once called them, Warrant, White Snake, White Lion. I mean, there was so much of, everything kind of became themed, Motley Crue, early 80s, Quiet Riot, Twisted Sister, and then you had the thrash bands, Metallica, Megadeth, Anvil, Slayer, Motorhead. I mean, they were everything has a similar look, style, sound, and the same that's what happened with ours. I mean, I remember when I first looked at Motley Crue, and I wasn't even a big Kiss fan, but I knew of Kiss enough that I looked at Shout at the Devil and I looked at Mick Mars, and I was like, he's the Gene Simmons one.
Right.
Even though Mick played guitar and Gene played bass, but Mick looked mean and evil and creepy. And then like Paul Stanley, like Tommy Lee looked a little bit more like Paul Stanley because he was a little, with a little bit wavier hair. And then Vince Neil, because his hair was kind of light and white, and it was like he's the Ace Frehley one. Like everybody had kind of borrowed from somebody else, and there has been so much borrowing that the time Tough got signed and I came out with my blonde hair and a purple headband on, and me and Brett had looked similar, and people said Warrant was a Poison ripoff, and people said Poison was a Van Halen ripoff or Motley ripoff, and Motley was a Van Halen ripoff. And in truth, Van Halen was really, Dave ripped off Jim Dandy. I mean, it just got to the point where there's enough dangers. There's enough Dangerouses. There's enough Poisons and Toughs and Pretty Boys and Faster Cats and
Danny Dangerously from the Zeros.
Yeah, and guns and roses and flowers and soil pots, that we need a change. And so then you had the grunge stuff, and then it was like you had Mudvayne, and then you had Puddle of Mud, and then you had Soil, and you had Disturbed, and Monster Magnet and Monster this, and everything became, again, the same thing. There was like, you could go see those new metal bands, and there'd be one guy with a bald head, and there'd be one guy with dreadlocks, and then there'd be one guy with the goatee that he, silly to have hair extensions, but at one point these guys were putting extensions in their beards,
right,
and little beads and little fake dreadlocks, and it's like that's just as silly as bleach blonde hair extensions to your waist. Like, you're really putting little clips in your beard and little colored braids, and again, it was just their image became just as important as ours was, but ours just had been overrun. It just been just run through the mill so many times that album covers and song titles were just like abused, and everything was a girl and a party and a fast car and a nightlight and neon lights and
ballads, the power ballads.
Yeah, the power ballads. And I'm missing you. I love you. I need you back. Come back. Love again. Once ain't enough. Like, all that stuff just became. And then for the grunge bands, it was like, I think you're this, I think you're that, and the marbles in the mouth. And it was just the Alice in Chains sound, the Nirvana sound. It was just dreary and down and slow, but it was also new and it was different. And obviously a lot of people gravitated towards it.
But weren't a lot of the grunge bands actually grew up listening to the glam metal bands like Nirvana?
The guys in Alice in Chains played the Coconut Teaser at one point, and they were reviewed, and there's pictures online of Lane Staley and Jerry Cantrell, and they look like CeCe DeVille. I mean, they're absolutely over the top bleach blonde glam rockers. Disturbed from Chicago, all those guys were long-haired rocker dudes that played the Thirsty Whale and opened up rock shows at the Gateway Theater and the Vic when they were in local bands with long hair and hockey stick neck guitars. But they never got signed. They didn't get their deal like Enough's Enough did. And a few years later, some haircuts, tuned down, dropped the guitar, put on some dirty roadie shorts, and suddenly they were down with the sickness.
I bet.
And sold millions, Now,
what did you think of bands like bands from your era? Like, I'll say Kiss, like putting out an album like Carnival of Souls, which was like a good Stone Temple Pilots record, but
right.
And then Warrant did, I think, was it Ultraphobic?
Right.
Do you think any of those bands from the glam era were successful at the conversion?
Not really. I mean, Wild Side, friends of mine, they put out a great record on Capitol called Under the Influence, which was very much like a Rat Dawkins-ish, kind of record. Some great songs produced
Paul
by
Stanley record.
Co-wrote some songs on there, or a song. Produced by Andy Johns, recorded at 5150 at Eddie Van Halen's house. Brent Woods, amazing guitar player. He's been playing with Sebastian Bach the last couple of years. He played with Vince Neil for years. I mean, they were a great band that had a great record, but then when they did their second record, it's 180 degrees. I mean, it was on TNT Records, which also did a Peter Criss record, called Chris Cat, I think, and I'm not even a Kiss fan.
It's half.
Yep, that's it. They were on TNT Records. They put out this record called Wild Side, self-titled, and everything was just 100% Stone Temple Pilots, Alice in Chains. I love the record. It sounds amazing, but it's not the same band. It sounds different. The guitar player was different. Bruce Draper was a guitar player who I think also played in Graveyard Train. And rest in peace, he recently passed away. Brent wasn't in the band at that time, but Drew and the guys changed their direction to kind of go with the times. And I thought the record was amazing. our second record, Religious Fix, is much heavier. You know,
Was that a conscious decision to go, hey, we gotta like?
yes and no. I mean, the thing is, a lot of what we put on our first record, which was started recording in 1990, was already, you know, a couple years old. You know, Good Guys Were Black and some of those songs, we demoed those in like 88. And, you know, I mean, by the time people really heard it, those songs were already 3 years old. So a lot of the stuff that we had written in 90 or 91 eventually became like Tied to the Bells, God Bless This Mess, and Dogs We Trust, all heavier stuff. I could say that was absolutely influenced by a couple things. Metallica putting out Enter Sandman was a game changer for everybody. And even Skid Row, when Skid Row came out, Skid Row was like Black and Blue with better songs and you know, the most amazing frontman the genre had seen. I mean, Skid Row was a metal band, but had a little pop sensibility to the 18 in Life and I Remember You. The fact that Sebastian looked the way he did at that time, was only 19 years old and could sing like a bird, you know, and it didn't hurt that Dave Snake Sabo grew up and was friends with John Bon Jovi and they had Doc McGee as their manager, you know. I mean, if John Bon Jovi and Doc McGee are not involved in that record, it's, you know, it could have been a great record with a killer band with a awesome looking sounding singer and some ripping badass tunes that really didn't go anywhere. But, you know, there's no denying that John Bon Jovi and Doc McGee involved at that time. And for all those keeping score, we all know at that time, Doc McGee managed the Scorpions, Bon Jovi, Motley Crue.
Yeah, they did all right. And did he manage Cinderella too? Because they had a Bon Jovi connection.
Nope, that was Larry Mazer.
Okay.
Yeah, Larry Mazer was their manager. So, I mean, again, you know, and Skid Row was the baby band. So they got to open up for a ton of Bon Jovi shows, a ton of Motley Crue shows. They got to go do that Moscow music thing, Peace Festival in front of like 120,000 people. That was a huge, huge thing, you know? And, you know, that can be the difference, you know, as well, as to whether or not a band goes through the roof or not. But I mean, they obviously had substance and they were playing around New York City, New Jersey for a few years with a different singer.
Oh,
you know?
What's his name?
Same songs. Matt Fallon. Matt Fallon was the original singer in Skid Row.
What do you think he's doing today?
If you Google Skid Row, Matt Fallon, you'll hear 18 in Life, Youth Gone Wild, all those songs were demoed with their original singer. And it's the same songs. I mean, Skid Row, those songs were written by Rachelle and Snake. I mean, who knows what he's doing? But I mean, Sebastian was the missing piece to that puzzle, just as I think I was the missing piece to the Tough puzzle. Tough was a band for a couple of years and been in LA for 9 months. But when I stepped in, it, for whatever reason, whether it was the fact that, you know, girls lit up because I was eye candy for the band or whatever, I don't know, but I was absolutely the missing piece that made Tough become what it became. And at the same time, I think it was, you know, it was good for the band and it was also bad. It was bad that, hey, it looks like Bret Michaels' little brother, you know.
But you guys are still touring, still
got old, you know.
Yeah, but you were one of the few people from that genre who still make money in this business.
I do, and it's not just based on touring. I started committing myself to the band, you know, from the beginning, and over the years had put out records, all of which independently, other than a couple, I facilitated everything from financing it to barcoding it and packaging it and selling it through P.O. boxes and eventually websites. And I still do it to this day, you know.
And you managed bands like Veins of Jenna.
Veins of Jenna was a project. You know, I had actually been offered to manage a few artists along the way. There was a young pop singer named Justin Lanning, who was from LA, Beverly Hills area, it was kind of like a Justin Timberlake, a young pop singer kid. He was like, I think he was 18 when I met him and his family. And I was referred by somebody to get involved to help them build his image and do PR and come up with a blueprint. And we're all good. I was, they wanted me to manage him at one point. but I was like, I don't really know this industry. I don't know NSYNC. I'm not
Backstreet Boys.
I'm not Lou Pearlman, you know. But at one point, you know, I had kind of self-managed Tough. You know, Michael was our original leader. He eventually stepped out. We had Power Star Management, Brian Kushner from Philadelphia, New Jersey, who also managed your favorite Brittany Fox. That was our manager. I don't know if you knew that. You didn't know that, did you?
I did not.
Brian Kushner. So he was the one who was managing us during the prime years there. But once he was gone and Michael was gone, I took on the reins, you know, and over time I eventually found myself wanting to work with the band, but it had to be the right situation. And I saw them and they were young and from Sweden, and I went with my gut, just like I did when Metal Sludge popped into my head. I saw this Veins of Jenna band, and I said, I'm going to work with them. And my next call was to Gilby Clarke, who was in, obviously, Guns N' Roses for several years. And I said, hey, I found a band. I need to demo them right now. He's like, dude, I just got home from tour with Hart, Nancy Wilson, and when do you want to do it? In a couple of weeks. I'm like, no, we need to do it in the next 72 hours because they leave town. This was in the summer of 2005. And, we made it happen. Gilby helped me with some demos. And, then I started using the site Sludge and other social networks to start throwing it out there. Hey, let's put this band out there and see what happens. And we started to dig in, and that became a whole thing in itself, and it was a good run.
I think I saw them open up for Rat at Universal.
Rat and Poison.
That's a big...
I got them on that tour.
Now, how does one get someone on a tour that, in the glam rock world?
That tour was absolutely a cold call. I called a friend of a friend that I knew, and I said, I need to get a message to Bobby Dahl. And they're like, what for? I'm like, tell him I want to talk to him about my band somehow being on this tour. Because at this point, it was early 2007. And called somebody. They called me back 10 minutes later, and they said, Bobby wants you to call him, or he's going to call you in 5 minutes. And my phone rang. It was a Florida number. And he's like, Stevie, Rachelle, it's Bobby Dahl. What do you want? I'm like, hey, Bobby, it's been a while. How are you? I need a favor. I need my band on your tour. And we went round and round for Rat Drop.
Nice plug for the Rat Drop.
We went back and forth for a few months. And, at this point, Bam Margera was already involved from the Jackass brand. And things were happening for Veins of Jenna. But, Bobby and I had meetings. We talked. They brought it to the bands. They brought it to Live Nation. Troy Blakely from ICM. At one point, I was on three-way with him and Bobby, and I was pulling rabbits out of my ass left and right, but it was magical, and it happened, and they were on the entire Poison Rat Summer Tour 2007 and played, I think, 55 amphitheaters across America. Main stage.
Oh, yeah, no, they were great.
Mm-hmm.
And then the singer left.
To get married.
And then just the band kind of, I don't want to say imploded.
Yeah,
but
kind of slowly kind of evolved and changed, and it ended. So, but it was a good 4 or 5 year run and learning experience for them and me. And I think we put them on the map, kind of like a little bit of a Hanoi Rocks vibe. They're kind of underground. They have some fans, but it never got to a huge level.
Yeah, Hanoi Rocks meets Poison meets... I think the grittiness of Motorhead, like just that underground vibe. And, they had a nice run thanks to your tutelage.
So you want to call this today?
We're going to call this today. There's so many, for the people out there. I mean, Stevie is like the Matt Drudge of the metal world. I mean, we didn't even get into Mark Free from King Cobra, who's now Marcy Free. We didn't get into many feuds he's had with rockers. You and Bret Michaels have recently buried the hatchet, from what I understand.
We have. And it was all a weird set of circumstances that he was basically a block from my house, and we ended up having a little little one-on-one, and it was all good. But we'll talk more about that and feuds and all that other stuff
in part 2.
In part 2.
We didn't even get to the girl story.
We can do some girl talk.
Because I've noticed, and I told you this, and we'll just gently wrap it up. Like when you go on Metal Sludge, and what's the website for the people who are out there who?
Well, if they Google Metal Sludge, you know, if you put in .tv or .com, they all go to the same, you know, the same home. So it's metalsludge.com.tv. And there's all kinds of stuff there to read. 17, 18 years of history, roughly 500 interviews with every rock star on the planet.
And then some.
And then some. We've also interviewed, you know, wrestlers and porn stars and various over the years.
Let's just say porn actresses.
Porn actresses, yeah.
But I mean, but you go on the gossip boards and you read the threads, and you know there's some great threads. You know, a Motley Crue set list from last night, it gets about 100, 200 views. You know, Rat's current situation. You know, Quiet Riot documentary. You know, 100, 200 views, and then Stevie's sex stories about going down on some girl behind the Troubadour Alley. Gets like 7,000 views. So, you know, Stevie has so many stories and has bedded many starlets, including a past guest on Inappropriate Earl. And if you know this show, there's not been a lot of female guests, so it shouldn't be.
Yeah, there will definitely be some stories to tell, and I will uncover some of it. It was... The 80s, like I said, were fun. There was some, you know, some tour bus stories, some backstage, some dressing rooms.
Alleyways.
Some alleyways next to a dumpster stories. There's some crazy stuff that went down with
your... I mean, you've lived the life that only I and many others can just dream about. You lived your dream. You've made a living doing what you love for 30 years, coming out here. You're like the girl in the Fallen Angel video for Poison. You came out here on the bus, bright lights, and you're still here 30 years later.
Fallen Angel. That's funny.
That's a great I knew the pimp in that video, the big, tall pimp. But now we're getting off into something else. Where can people buy Tough CDs, Tough merchandise?
You know what? Google it. If you go to toughcds.com or to Metal
Tuff.
TUFFCDS.com, you can go to Metal Sludge. You can Google Tough, iTunes, Amazon, eBay, Napster, TuneCore. Everything's available digitally. 8 records, 8 Tough records, 2 solo records.
Tons of DVDs,
T-shirts, half a dozen Shameless studio records that I've been on from the band Shameless, a group out of Germany. There's probably another dozen or so tribute records I've contributed for everything from songs from Styx to Journey, Guns N' Roses, Bon Jovi, Motley Crue.
You're like the glam version of Steve Lukather. You've just played on...
I've been around on some musical compilations, yeah.
And so, please, and on Twitter and Instagram, where do people find you?
Twitter / Metal Sludge, Twitter / Stevie Tough, Instagram Stevie Tough, Facebook, Stevie Rachelle Tough or Stevie Rachelle, Metal Sludge. There's all kinds of groups. And
Jesus, you got a lot of websites.
Yeah.
And on YouPorn, what's your password?
Don't have any on those.
Tough65.
YouTube.
Guys.
Search YouTube. There's a lot of Tough, Stevie Rachelle, Shameless.
And you were briefly in Decline of Western Civilization.
I was in Decline of Western Civilization, and a handful of other. I appeared on Dream On HBO as like a band extra. I was on Melrose Place. I was in Wayne's World 2 in the crowd and a scene or two. I've had my fair share of quote unquote extra work acting. I was also in The Stoned Age.
Wow.
Where the guys were all in the warehouse scene with the tall beers, and they're going to the break up the party. I'm in a bunch of scenes there too, which people occasionally will find those shots because I'm pretty dominantly visual. I mean, my blonde hair, redhead band,
your bodybuilder like physique,
big shoulders. I'm there.
You're like the modern age Kane Roberts.
Hulk Hogan with a little better hair.
Yeah, just a little, brother. I think we'll end on that. A Hulk Hogan zinger, seeing that this is WrestleMania week.
Okay.
So, guys, this is part one of Stevie Rachelle. This man is a good friend of mine. Support by Tough Records, CDs, shirts, Metal Sludge shirts. You guys know where to find us on iTunes and SoundCloud. Inappropriate Earl. Leave a review. I leave all up. And coming soon, we've got the beautiful female guitar player from Alice Cooper, Nita Strauss, coming down next week, and many more 80s guy. Mark Ferrari coming in sooner than later. So thank you guys. I do this for you guys. I don't make $1 on this show other than the joy in my heart from providing you guests like Stevie Rachelle.
Can I please say thanks to Earl for letting me come in? This is a part one. There will be a part two because we have a whole bunch of news on Tough history for the 30-year anniversary coming up. And we have to indulge into the debauchery that was the Sunset Strip from Gazzari's to the Troubadour and the Country Club and back.
Because you were there.
I was there.
You were in it. I mean, I was there, but you were in it. And, there's, I only wish you were in LA a little sooner than you were so we could get into the Starwood and Eddie Nash stories. But, Eddie Nash, great owner of the Starwood where Van Halen got their start, Quiet Riot, used to have girls come over to his house. He was a big Coke dealer, wouldn't sell Coke. He would just take these huge dumps and then have girls lick his ass clean. But that guy sounds like a real hoot. So we'll leave on that. Thank you, Eddie Nash, for providing Van Halen the club to play their music, Quiet Riot, and London, Nikki Sixx's old band. But Stevie's got some things to do. We got to cut this right now. Come back for more, Stevie. Thank you to Stevie for providing the music for every episode of Inappropriate Earl. Stephen Piercy for providing the mic knuckles, which I would suggest you get. And we will see you guys real soon. Inappropriate Earl, like an Asian airliner, out.